podcast. I'm your host and writer behind 99geek.ca, Andrew Geczy, and this is being recorded on Sunday, March 21st, 2021. My goal in life has always been to write for television, but it's a goal I've had little luck so far in attaining, so instead I've resorted to self-publishing novels on Amazon, but writing the monthly chapters like episodes of TV shows that people can download at patreon.com/99geek. Every chapter is released in 4 parts, a teaser in 3 acts, and every month features a different book spanning both science fiction and fantasy and every genre in between. That's right, I wrote all the books featured on this podcast, trying to make ends meet in what feels like a poverty nightmare. I'm doing all of this alone, living off unemployment insurance. I don't have a budget, I don't have a team, no editors or producers. I have no backup, no support. I'm completely alone, pro bono, with nothing but my passion for telling stories, and thus I ask you not to judge me or my work or my production values too harshly. I'm doing the best I can, trying to wear all the hats. Tonight we'll be reading from Phase 3 of Season 1 of 99% Geek, a chapter of a book entitled Royalty. Remember, you can follow along at patreon.com/99geek. Chapters are somewhat standalone, but at least make sure you start on week 1 for the recap. This is not week 1. This is chapter episode number 1 of Royalty, entitled Concerning Royalty. And so we continue with week number 3.
Why haven't I ever met my uncle before?
Ali's brother asked, not for the first time. He was at that age, the age all kids reach when they just can't stop asking questions.
You have,
Ali answered Ronan without looking up from her book.
You were just too young and stupid to remember.
Ali supposed she was once that person too. But one day she learned that all the answers she'd ever need were in books, and she'd never looked back. Ali was proud to say she had the best library of books in all the village of Westerly. Not that it was something she went around boasting about. When she was younger, she would be teased relentlessly by the other kids in the village.
It's Allison, they would say. All reading and no play makes Allison a dull girl.
What did they know? They couldn't possibly know that through books, Ali could go on the kind of adventures those kids couldn't even dream of. She could be a bloodthirsty pirate sailing the great ocean, or a royal defending her kingdom from invasion against an army of 1,000,000 slaves. She could be a prince falling in love with a princess, or a 100-year-old man contemplating his long-wasted life, a courtesan on the streets of the mercantile capital Narcafe. The only thing all her stories had in common were that they were anything but dull. But they also taught her things. Without books, she wouldn't know that Narcafe was the largest free city in all of Chaldean, and largely survived the Cullings by proving their worth to the royals and trading with them. But in secret, they traded with the free villages as well, the ones like Westerly forced to hide amongst the forested valleys of the continent. Ali was 15, and in her entire life she had never known a Culling. Westerly Valley had never been threatened by a royal before, at least not in anyone's memory. And a lot of the people of the village didn't even believe in them. Royals and their dark city of Dunkel was just a scary story to get unruly kids to behave. But Ali believed the stories. She'd read every book she could get her hands on that dealt with the topic of royals, and her mother had seen them with her own 2 eyes. Her mother had seen a lot of things during her travels around the world before settling down in Westerly and starting a family. But her mom wasn't with them then, as Ali trudged along on her horse, and the books she'd brought with her barely had any mention of royals in them at all. The books she was reading instead followed a dashing thief who kidnapped a scared princess who was about to be killed by her own scheming parents. It was a sweeping love story, and one of Ali's favorites. She'd read it like 10 times.
How come she gets her own horse?
Ronan asked his dad in a whine.
I want my own horse.
Ronan was sharing a horse with their father, Dermot.
We can't afford another horse,
Dermot told his son dismissively.
And even if we could, would you be willing to take care of him or her? Your sister has been looking after Bill for as long as you've been alive, Ronan. They have a bond you can't break.
Ali could feel her father staring at her, but she refused to look up from the pages of her book.
It's how she can be so absorbed in what she's reading. Dermot continued without just wandering off.
Maybe when you learn to read, we'll give you a horse of your own, Allie muttered to her brother without looking up from her book. Dermot was leading them, Allie's horse Bill knowing to just follow along with his. That sort of seemed like... Oh, who cares? I'll fix it later. I will highlight that. You get what I mean. It just kind of doesn't work grammatically. And then she continues, you know when you stop being so young and stupid?
Allie, her father said, be nice to your brother.
Yeah, Ronan said. Or I'll get your horse, and you'll have to walk the rest of the way.
Apparently he hadn't been paying attention. Bill would have no patience for him.
That's not going to happen,
their father told Ronan. He didn't see Allie stick her tongue out at her brother before hiding her face in her book again as he looked back at her. She scrunched up her face as if she had read something interesting on the page in front of her. This was her favorite scene. The scene where the thief tells the princess he was falling in love with her. It was Allie's favorite part. And he goes to kiss her, and she slaps him because she's not so convinced yet. Allie tried not to let her family see her creeping smile, but she needn't have worried. The rest of them were focused on the road, or at least where the road should have been. But the road had ended a good ways back. The three of them were making a trek into the barren wastes to visit their uncle's camp. Their plow had broke, and their mom had convinced their dad that their uncle would have a better one he'd happily lend them.
So, what's my uncle like?
Ronan asked. He was almost 5 years old, but it had been a couple years since their uncle had last passed by Westerly, heading off with a group into the barren wastes to open a trading camp. Really nice, Allie muttered without looking up from a book. All hugs and tummy-rumbling laughs. He would bring me a new book every time he visited. Some cool exotic tome from his journeys. A drop of sweat from Allie's brow landed on the page of her book, and she wiped her face with her sleeve. They had rode out from under the foliage cover a while back, around when the road had faded away, and were now crossing the sands of the wastes. The sun beat down on them hard, but that had been expected, and they had brought plenty of water for the trip and back. Leaning back on her horse, Allie poured some of the water over her face, careful not to get some in her afro, and wash out the colored dyes she used to make streaks in her black hair.
Do you think we'll have anything for me?
Ronan asked, still going on about his uncle.
He doesn't even know we're coming,
Dermot told Ronan, shutting the kid up.
And he's really not all that.
Dad doesn't like Uncle Goldak, Allie informed her brother.
It's not that I don't like him,
her dad corrected her sternly.
I just hate everyone on your mother's side. You haven't seen them like I have. They're nice when it comes to family, but I've seen how they treat everyone else.
With a heart of stone, he muttered as they passed a statue on the side of the hill. It was of an orc woman running from something with a look of absolute terror on her face, and on her shoulder a goblin seemed to be tugging on her collar and urging her forward. Dermot stared up at the statue, slowing his horse as they passed.
I don't get it.
As they continued on their way, Allie immediately noticed the clacking of their horses' feet on the sand. It seemed the sand around them had hardened somehow. Allie slipped off her horse to touch the lighter brown of her palm against the sand. It didn't give way to her fingers. The sand hadn't only hardened, it had fused.
What do you think could cause this?
Dermot asked her like she would have any clue.
Some kind of heat, perhaps?
No, Allie said, shaking her head. Sand, when heated, makes glass. This is more like some kind of rock.
Whatever it is,
Dermot said, getting off his horse too.
It means we're close.
He helped Ronan off, and tied both of their horses to the orc statue.
Stay close to me.
Their father said as they came around a ridge to find 100 more statues. All posed as if in some kind of fight outside. All posed as if in some kind of fight outside Goldak's trading post that also seemed made out of the same smooth stone.
What in the royal hell has happened here?
Dermot asked no one in particular. I want to explore, Ronan said, running into the stone fort. Whee!
Ronan,
Dermot called after Ali's brat brother.
I said stay close.
It's fine, Dad, Ali said, placing her hand against the wall of the fort. This place seems to be abandoned and eerily quiet. The stone was cold, which was surprising under that heavy sun.
You can't know that for sure,
Dermot said, following Ronan into the fort. She studied the wall closely, confused at the sculpted detail. I don't get it, she said, looking around to realize she was alone. Why would they sculpt a stone wall to look as if it had been made out of wood? She wasn't sure what to make of it, but she was pretty sure Ronan had the right idea. Whatever secrets there were to be expunged there, they would be inside. She stepped under the stone gateway into the front courtyard of the fort. She was surprised to find 40 archers, all with arrows notched in their bows, all frozen to stone before they could even let loose a single shaft. Ali reached out to touch one of the statues, almost wanting to hold her breath. From how still and quiet it was. That totally makes sense, yes. Ali reached out to touch one of the statues, almost wanting to hold her breath from how still and quiet it was. There was a flurry of motion at what looked like the smithy, and she approached the hut cautiously. Each landing of her footsteps were like echoing cracks across the stone fort. Ronan? She called at the now stone smithy. She called out at the now stone smithy. As she got to the entrance of the smithy and stared into its shade, a bird flew out and startled her, loudly and frenetically flapping its wings to scare her away. When she didn't do as it clearly hoped, the bird took flight instead, the orange and yellow feathered bird soaring up into the sky and disappearing. Peering back into the smithy, she took notice of the forge and the fire within. Even the fire was made of stone. Dad? She called out for someone again, and again she was greeted with just silence in return. Had something happened to them? Finally a voice rang out from above her.
Up here.
Her dad called down to her, and she made it into the actual fort proper and found stairs up onto the suspended walkway. All stone. It was up on the walls that Ali found her father and brother staring down at a rather lifelike statue of Uncle Goldak. He was on his knees, at least a statue of him was, and looked scared out of his mind. Looked a lot like he was about to either scream or hurl. It's like something happened here, Ali spoke when the other two didn't. I think someone did this to all these people.
I guess you won't be lending us a plow,
Dermot muttered, putting his hands on his hips and letting off a sigh as Ali got to his side. Insensitive much? Ali asked, leaning forward to peer at the detail in her uncle's stone face.
What were you saying to your brother earlier?
Her father asked as she traced her finger down her uncle's cheek.
He was too young and stupid? Well, you're too young and stupid to understand the value of money. Plows cost a lot. We have none.
I understand that, Ali said to her father, stepping back. I just think there are more important things right now. Her father gestured at the fort around them.
All this? He asked. Mark my words, this is all just his many mistakes and constant arrogance catching up with him.
The two kids looked at him in surprise at his assurance.
I promise you.
Ronan stepped forward from the others and raised his hand towards the stone Goldak. Hi, Uncle Goldak, he spoke softly. I'm Ronan. Okay, Dermot said, putting his hand on Ronan's shoulder and trying to lead the kid away. Maybe we should just go. Ronan pulled his shoulder free from his father's grasp. The young, pale, brown-skinned kid stomping his foot defiantly into the stone beneath them. Ronan always had light-colored skin, especially when compared to Allie or her mother. They both had skin as black as the night. Some days, Allie would joke that Ronan came from a different family. It would upset him every time. Their family meant a lot to Ronan. Allie was reminded just how much by the way he fiercely fought for his uncle's life.
We can't leave him.
I think if you keep watching, you'll find that we can,
Dermot insisted.
because there's absolutely no way we're taking him with us.
I hate to say it, Dad,
Allie said, crossing her arms. I think Ronan is right.
It's not happening,
Dermot said to Allie.
Allison Bailey, do you know how heavy he is?
As if to make his point, her father put his hands on Goldak's chest and tried to push him. The statue wouldn't even budge.
See?
Allie knelt down to examine the base of the statue, where Goldak's knees met the suspended walkway on the wall.
I think he's fused to the floor,
Allie told her father and brother.
I might be able to get him free with my chisel. It's in my pack.
No,
Dermot said, but Allie was already jogging for the stairs, down.
I forbid it,
Dermot yelled after her. She passed the front gate and made for her horse. Scene change. Scene change. Scene change. Also, I apologize. I think the voice I was going to give Dermot was going to be different. Fairer voice. More like... Anyway, too late now. At least for this chapter. He's all gruff voiced. Like most of the people, most of the men in my stories. It's one of the female voices I can do. Pretty good at a dog too. Moving on to the next scene. The woods around their land were never quiet. Far from it. There was always the calls of distant birds, the chirping of insects, the crashing of water from the nearby waterfall, the rushing of the stream that led from the waterfall all the way to the valley's lake, and from there the great ocean. Marilyn Bailey knew those woods, nay, that whole valley, as if by heart. She could draw a map and detail the placement of every tree, rock, and hill. She could traverse those same woods effortlessly without so much as snapping a twig. Her footsteps were silent, methodical, deliberate. The deer she was approaching was completely unawares, grazing peacefully on the grass beneath her feet. Lynn knew that the deer was a female. She had been tracking it on and off for some days now. She knew that it had been grazing on their land. What she didn't know was where it disappeared to at night. Were there more of them? She would follow it, see where it would take her, and then... Well, that was why she'd brought her spear. She held it with one hand, not at the center of the shaft, but instead the center of the weight of the spear. Most of the metal shaft was needed to even out the heavy and simple but long spearhead. It was a weapon she had wielded for many decades, and she'd won many a battle with it in her hands. She'd also hunted many a dinner, and whether this deer led her back to its hideout or not, she intended for her spear to taste its blood that day. Her family was expected to return sometime that evening, and she really wanted to have a surprise waiting for them. Nothing tasted better than some roasted venison on an open fire. Lynn was so caught up in the mouth-watering thought, in fact, that her foot landed on the wrong twig. It made a loud snap that reverberated across the forest and startled the deer she had spent so long tracking. Perhaps she was getting rusty. The deer straightened, scanning the foliage for any sign of what had made that sound. Lynn raised her spear over her shoulder. She couldn't let it escape. Her muscles poised. She took up a position and double-checked her aim. Hopefully her throwing wasn't as rusty as her stealth. A beam of sunlight caught on the shaft of her spear, reflecting forward and alerting her position to the deer. It turned towards her, and the two matched eyes for just a moment, a split second that seemed to drag on for minutes. And then the deer was off, bounding from the clearing into the tree line and making for, well, the canyon wall was that way. It was going to trap itself unless it was planning to veer south towards the slope. And if it was headed there, well, she was pretty sure she could get there first. She took off, her feet slapping against the forest floor as she ran at full speed in almost the opposite direction from the deer. Veering around, her right foot landed on a log and she launched herself into the air, swinging on a branch and landing further down the hill. She could hear the wildlife around her freak out and scatter. As well they could. As well they could. Her interest was in a single animal that day, and she was pretty sure she was gaining on it. She came to a stream and used her spear as a long jump pole. I think that's supposed to be like a. Maybe that helps. I just added a dash between them. It's like the long jump event pole thing that she would know nothing about because I'm sure Olympics don't exist in her world. She came to a stream and used her spear as a long jump pole to launch herself over the running water. She then dropped below a ridge, the dead leaves on the forest floor slipping out from underneath her and sending her into a slide. She reached the bottom of the ridge and looked around at the continued decline in front of her. No deer. Is decline the right word there? I feel like, because I'm so used to that being used to describe an emotional degradation. Opposite of incline. Nope. In fact, it also was like, you mean incline as in like, unlikely, disinclined. No, 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 I meant incline as in a slope. Decline. Apparently that is correct. I say looking at it's so weird to see that word used in that way. It's usually used in a very different way. Yeah, weird. Anyway. She reached the bottom of the ridge and looked around at the continued decline in front of her. No deer. Had she been too late? Or was it? ... Then she heard it. The loud rustling. Here it came, and it was really running. She could hear it bounding up and over the ridge she hid under. Like that, Lynn rose and jabbed her spear straight up and through the deer's heart. She didn't miss, her aim sure and true, and the deer felt almost no pain as it died almost instantly. Hoisting the deer's carcass over her head mightily, her sweaty muscles straining at the weight, she brought it over her shoulder and down onto the forest floor with a loud thud, a remarkable show of strength that no one saw. She swallowed back a couple deep gulps of oxygen, her lungs burning from the sprint she'd taken off to make it there in time. And then she heard it. Over her loud breathing, the quiet whine. It was almost like a high-pitched howl, and the creature making such a noise stumbled out from a small cave in the ridge. It was a baby fawn, no older than a month. Hello there. Hello there, Lynn said to the baby as it trotted out. As it trotted out to Lynn's. As it trotted out to the side of Lynn's. Nope. As it trotted out to Lynn's. And said to the baby as it trotted out and began nuzzling against Lynn's kill. There. Comma. And began nuzzling against Lynn's kill. I think that works. All right. Hello. Hello there, Lynn said to the baby as it trotted out and began nuzzling against Lynn's kill. Oh my, Lynn muttered. Aren't you just the cutest little thing? It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. She reached out for the child, and reluctantly it allowed her to pat its head. It is head? No, that's the wrong it's. She reached out for the child, and reluctantly it allowed her to pat its head. You poor thing. If I had known about you, I never would have killed your mother, I swear. She pulled rope from her belt and tied one end around the baby fawn. Well, I'm not going to just abandon you, little one. You can come home with me and meet my family. She hoisted the mother deer's corpse on her shoulders and carried it off towards the edge of the forest, leading the young fawn along with the makeshift leash she'd strung together. The young fawn, barely able to walk, struggled and yanked against her leash. Her leash. Her leash? Yeesh. The young fawn, barely able to walk, struggled and yanked against her leash, but held tight and didn't relent. But Lynn held tight and didn't relent. It would die out there on its own. She wasn't about to let that happen. As she reached the edge of the forest, she could just make out her husband and two kids in the distance. They were early, following the road back home, and they were dragging something behind their horses. Something that looked suspiciously not like a plow. And that is the end of week 3. I hope you enjoyed this week's storybook time. My name is Andrew Geczy, and my brand is 99% Geek, found at 99geek.ca. Oh, I wanted to mention, there was a poll on my website that you would have had no luck, no hope in knowing about, because A, I didn't mention it in the last, in week 2 like I had meant to. And B, I forgot to release week 2 until like Thursday for some reason, because I don't know, I recorded it, I turned it into the proper format, and then I just forgot about it for a week. So you had no hope of knowing about this poll, but there was a poll on the website, and the poll was asking about Oka and Elrig's fate. It allowed you guys to choose, and weirdly enough, that poll got a lot of hits. It got like more hits than anything else on my Patreon that week, and yet not a single person voted. Not one person voted. So yeah, they're turned to stone, never to be seen again, I guess, because nobody cared enough about them to vote. Again, partly my fault. I should have warned you guys that the vote existed, assuming there's even anyone out there who would have cared. If you do care, the poll is still there and it hasn't closed. You can still vote after the fact, but obviously I've already written their fate. So yeah. Moving on with what I was just reading. My name is Andrew Geczy. My brand is 99% Geek, found at 99geek.ca. I'm a writer writing monthly chapters of novels like episodes of TV shows, releasing them in 4 weekly segments, a teaser and 3 acts on Sundays on my Patreon page. Every month it's a different book over a range of genres, and they sometimes even cross over and connect. At the end of the month, the finished chapter is added to the PDFs attached at the bottom of every post. Finally, the finished books are self-published on Amazon. There's a dark fantasy story about a post-apocalyptic world where powerful royals rule and enslave the remaining people struggling to survive on the last remaining landmass. There's also a sci-fi story about a people on a dying world who have built a ship to a new one, but their project is almost brought down by a terrorist organization within their own ranks. Finally, there's a crossover story where characters from my other books are brought into the distant future where the princess of a far advanced civilization, one that lives in a solar system-sized megastructure around a Dyson Sphere, needs help defeating her twisted, power-hungry brother. And all these stories will be outside the paywall for all to enjoy as new episodes release weekly, and the finished chapters will be attached to the bottom of every post on the site in convenient PDF format, readable on computers, tablets, ebook readers, and phones at the end of the month. But that's not all my stories. There's also urban fantasy tales about a teenage girl turned into a vampire against her will, or a scorned lover investigating paranormal phenomena, or a journalist covering news and politics in the Middle East. And there's a fantasy story about a fallen angel trying to stop the end of the world. And all these stories are published and available on Amazon, and are also safe and sound behind the paywall in PDF format attached to an archive at the top of my Patreon page. Only viewable by subscribers, my entire library of work, thousands of pages worth, is easily accessible to every subscriber at any level. There's even a Geekly Weekly blog which covers all the news you may have missed over the week, as well as ranks the week's worth of television and makes predictions on what new pop culture things might be in the public social consciousness for the next week. Finally, I do video game streams, both multiplayer matchmaking as well as single-player campaign playthroughs. You can see me play games like Final Fantasy, Call of Duty, Hitman, and more. And you can see it all in one place. So stay tuned and maybe subscribe. It's only $1 and the support you show will go a very long way, I promise. There are also higher tiers. Give $5 one month and you can name a character or location or suggest a thing you might want to see. Basically, you get to give a noun and then I promise to incorporate that noun into one of my stories somehow. Maybe not the same month you give the suggestion, but within 3 months guaranteed. No matter how crazy, you can't sabotage me, I promise. Think of it like a fun improv game, and you can keep giving nouns for every month you pay at the $5 tier. Or if you give $10, you don't get 2 nouns, but you can give a description to go with your noun. Describe the personality of your character, or the look of your location, or the importance of your item. For $10, you get a noun and a description. You can also give $1 towards supporting my efforts at video game streaming or my weekly blog if that's more where your interests lie. I'm as poor as it gets, living paycheck to paycheck and sometimes starving, so I understand if you are too. I don't want to take food out of your mouth, so your intention is enough. Say something, comment here at the very least. Follow me on Twitter at Andrew Geczy, that's ANDREW GECZY, or Instagram at WingCommander4, that's WINGCOMMANDERIV, that's Roman numeral 4. Live long and prosper, may the force be with you. Long live Marceline the Vampire Queen. We are the 99% Geek.